start us off.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. If you haven't, please, you're more than welcome to get a drink. We'll start in a few minutes. Are we ready to start now?
Sure.
Sure, awesome. Hi, my name is Raymond Diaz. I'm the Wilson Day Social Engagement Program Coordinator at the Center for Community Engagement. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for second BreakingTheBubble event of the semester. BreakingTheBubble is a community conversation series that addresses issues of timely importance to the local community and of interest to students and other members of the University of Rochester community. This series works to babble around campus by creating a space where students and community members can come together to learn and discuss the issues that we in the Rochester community are facing. I want to thank our sponsors, Rebecca Orton from the Office of Residential Life and Housing Services, Glenn Sarasletti from the Center for Community Engagement, and Eleanor Coleman from the Rotary Club of Rochester Southwest. This talk will be followed by a short discussion where you'll be able to ask some questions. If you're a University of Rochester student who wants to get medallion credit, please make sure to check in with Glenn in the back. We will also be recording this event, and it's going to be available on our website, so if you have any friends who are going to make it tonight, please refer them to our website. Tonight's event is titled Fostering Accessible Play Through Community Engagement. We have Calvin Eaton from 540 West Maine and Suzan Hoffman, who will lead a conversation about how a vacant lot in Rochester's 1940 neighborhood is being transformed into an accessible play space and sensory garden for an exciting cooperation process with Rochester community members and many partners, including 540 West Maine, the University of Rochester Barbara J. Burger iZone, the 1940 Community Association, Rochester City School District School Number 29, and the Rotary Club of Rochester Southwest. Calvin Eaton is the founder and chief executive officer of 540 West Maine, a local grassroots, not-for-profit organization that creates change through community-based connection and anti-racism education. Calvin is also an adjunct professor at St. John Fisher College. He holds a bachelor's and master's degree from the Rochester Institute of Technology, as well as a master's in education from Middle Tennessee State University. Suzan Hoffman is an E5 student at the University of Rochester, studying brain and cognitive sciences with a minor in computer science. This year, she's also completing an entrepreneurial project on studio arts and African American studies. And she's also a Clark Fellow at the Barbara J. Burger iZone at the River Campus Library. Please give him a big round of applause.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, everybody. I'm really glad to be here with everyone. I'm just sort of like taking all of you in because it's been quite a while since I've been in person with the community in this way. So I'm really happy for you all to be here on this fall evening. My name is again Calvin Eaton, and I am the executive director and founder of the nonprofit organization 540 West Maine. And just a little bit of background about 540. We founded in 2016, right at 540 West Main Street, not too far from where we're at here tonight. Our organization and what we do, as we've evolved over the years, we are a virtual anti-racism education platform and nonprofit organization, and our mission is really to promote justice for all and think about equitable education, think about community development, community engagement, and a lot of the work that we do really started in the Susan B. Anthony neighborhood, which is where we founded and originally had a physical location. Since 2016, with the pandemic, we've evolved to do the primary method in which we execute our work is virtual, but we're still very much connected to the Rochester community, especially the west side of Rochester, and working with iZone, which we'll talk more about today, in the University of Rochester and other partners to really continue to have conversations and engagement on how we can improve upon all of our communities and make our spaces and make our city more accessible for more people. So I'll stop there for now and turn it over to Suzan, and then we'll proceed with our conversation.
Hi everyone, thanks Calvin. It's really good to see all this project. I just want to acknowledge that you are all out here and you came to the event, so thank you so much. I also do want to say that we have many people here that have helped with this project. So if you have been a part of this project, or if you are one of our awesome co-creators, I'd love for you to just wave a hand really quickly. And that can be in any way, shape, or form. I see you, John, over there. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, again, for being here. I feel really lucky to have been working on this project. Again, I am a U of R student. It is my 5th year this year, and I took the opportunity to take a 5th year here so that I could really explore on possibilities like this. And iZone, the Innovation Center at U of R, many of you might know it as a study space, but it's also really meant to be a space for innovation, creative thinking, problem solving, and at any point you can stop into iZone if you have a big idea, and you can work that out at iZone. So I actually have had the opportunity to work there since last spring semester. I also work at the Center for Community Engagement, which is hosting this event, so thank you, Glenn, over there, and all that are part of the Center for Community Engagement. But yeah, this opportunity is just really amazing. I'm very excited to tell you all about our project. This is really meant to be a conversation. I know we're kind of sitting over here far away from you all. But we are really excited to just get your input about this project. I really encourage you to pick up a flyer in the back and sign up for our newsletter. And I guess that's what I'll say to start. I'll pass that.
Thanks, Susan. So I don't even know where we kind of want to start. We really do want this to be like a dialogue and conversation. So I think we have the microphone. We'll pass it around if people have questions or comments as we go through our time together. But just to sort of give a little bit of context about the theme of the night and this play space, I think really thinking about how important language and words are, and that words matter, the integrity of our words. So we have this theme, help build a community play space. We should probably add to that, help build an accessible community play space. And I think that thinking about where this project started and how it's evolved in a very much like iterative process, the lot on which we're talking about, so 133 Kenwood Avenue, which is near the Arnett Branch Library, very close to where we are now. I think we use the term in the introduction that it's vacant. It's actually not fully vacant. It's not vacant. It's not a vacant lot. And it's really important to make that distinction as part of this conversation, because some of the things that I've personally learned in this process around having these big ideas around maybe you see a need in the community, you see a need in a low-income community, you see a need in a predominantly Black and brown community. It's so important that we think about how we're engaging with our idea with that community every step of the way. I think that it's great to have big ideas, but it's also important to take a step back in our idea and think about like who's already using space and like what are they using it for. So this idea of like a vacant lot, quote unquote vacant lot, it's actually not a vacant lot. It's actually a lot that there is a garden that exists there now. The garden is right across the street from the school, and it's really been stewarded for a few seasons by the Southwest Rotary Club, which is something that when we were determining sort of like determining where our play space would be with this national organization, Kaboom, I don't think that I was initially aware of that it was already a space that was being sort of stewarded and supported by the community. So this garden is named after Kaylee, whose family is here with us today, and a student who I believe has passed away and has this garden dedicated to their honor. And how it connects with Kaboom. Kaboom is a national play equity organization that was founded almost 20 years ago around supporting communities like the Rochester community around how communities can build spaces in which children, their families, feel connected to play. We think about this idea of gentrification and redlining so often in Black and brown communities have been stripped and they're devoid of green space. You think about a park, you think about a playground. These are features of urban centers, of communities, of suburban and urban communities that really, the idea of a park is like so natural and normal in many communities, but for so many Black and brown individuals, because of these systemic structural issues that have plagued our communities and that are really a result of structural racism, we don't have those in our community, or we don't have them in a way in which people feel safe to interact with them. And so Kaboom is really all about fulfilling that need and connecting with grassroots, community-based groups, schools, organizations to build play spaces within a neighborhood in which one does not currently exist. That's sort of like the context of this. So my dear friend and the director of iZone, Julia Maddox, who's in the back taking photos, sort of brought this idea as part of the work that iZone does, being a steward of making connection with students and the community with the University of Rochester, and said, hey, I really think that this idea of this would really be something that could come from and sort of be an engine with 540 West Maine. And I think this was before or during, right before the pandemic or right after the pandemic, I can't remember. But as we were sort of interrogating for ourselves whether we wanted to continue to exist as an in-person organization, of course we really wanted to make sure that it was clear to the community that even though we were deciding to go virtual, that we were not going to pull out of the Rochester community, if you will, in terms of how we're engaging programming. So the idea was really something that piqued my interest, especially around accessibility. So me being a disabled person and being disabled being a large part of my existence and how I interact with the world and with the community, this idea of an accessible play space was so important. So not just building a play space, but making sure that this play space was something that people, no matter, people of different abilities, people who are disabled, children who are disabled, were able to access the features of whatever we decided to, or what we sort of ideated with the community. And so that meant thinking about like the different types of disabilities. So there's people who, autistic individuals, people who have invisible disabilities, mental illness, there's people who have physical disabilities and who use mobility aids, there are people who are blind, who are deaf. All of these iterations, and as we started to sort of think about this concept and the ideas, I think one of the things that really strikes me is how, for as lovely and how as great as an organization like Kaboom is, some of how large organizations or granting bodies interact with grassroots groups like ours and like departments of universities, there's already some inherent bias built into the system. So Kaboom is like, great, create this proposal, give us pictures, give us a design schema, give us all of these things so that we can determine whether your project will fund your project. So usually you don't have a lot of time to do this. You have like maybe 6 weeks to do this. And so as we are in this space of engagement, we think about how that structure inherently built into that is this idea of like, we have to do this in a quick amount of time. You don't have a lot of time, you have no money, so there's no money given to you to create for us a graph or an architectural rendering of this idea. You think about like the privilege and the resources that you would need in order to do that, to even just get the grant. Fortunately, you already have some privileges as a grassroots organization, having a connection with the University of Rochester that has students, volunteers, other people who already are studying and thinking about these issues, who can maybe stop what they're doing and like devote 8 hours to this new project, something that our organization, being grassroots, did not have the positioning to do without a lot of support. So you think about already, there are privileges that we as an organization have to make us more likely than another group to even get the funding for this project. And that's not a bad thing, it's just something to keep in mind as all of these systems connect, to think about like who gets the funding, how they interact with their community. There's already these like inherent biases built into these structures. And these are things that we intend to communicate with Kaboom, because if you're interacting with the community like our community, if you're only giving a group 6 weeks to even come up with the idea, you're already essentially removing multiple groups from even being able to enter into the process on whether their idea is received or not. Kaboom has already a lot of connections with Rochester and other Kaboom play spaces that makes our city better positioned than others to get another iteration or round of Kaboom funding. So I say all of this to say that as we think about like philanthropy and how money is decided to be given to communities, we can't talk about it without also talking about the inherent biases that are already set up in the system that credit organizations, typically, so organizations who are led by Black and Latinx people typically are less likely to get funded statistically, and we think about the reasons why that is. So that's one part of the conversation. So there's already all of this inherent sort of like this idea that you have to rush, you have to, from your perspective, come up with an idea that you think will support the community that you're going to serve without having any time to connect with that community. So because of this sets up some areas of like challenge and miscommunication that happen. So as we're like looking at different lots in the city, we're trying to decide like, okay, what will be the best place to do this, because you have to determine all of this before you get the funding. And again, they're not giving you funding to do this planning. So all of this planning and ideation and time is coming from the budget that you've already set to do other things, to try to get this new funding for this new project that will help the community. So there's already these structures of colonialism built into the system. You get the funding, so you go through that process, they make an announcement, it's really great. You ask for like $60,000, they only give you $27,000. So then you went through all of that, you said we need at the bare minimum $60,000 to do this project, but we only get less than half of that. So already again, you're put in a position of like playing catch-up deficit in an already like growing grassroots organization, stretched for time, stretched for resources. So I think it's important to think about these challenges, like what are the challenges of community engagement, and why so often do grassroots, Black-led groups fail to not only execute a project like Kaboom, but also sustain it, because there are already these inherent biases that are built into the system that we had no control over, but maybe we can have control over as we have conversations like this for the future. How can Kaboom maybe give funding to plan with the community before they give the grant, so that you're not digging into your budget or your bank account to like just fund the planning of this project? So as we started to like go through the process, it became very clear that, wow, this is a huge endeavor. We have to connect with the city of Rochester. We have to connect with architects. We don't know the language of permitting. We don't know the language of like city guidelines and regulations. What are you wanting to build on the project or on the land? How permanent is it? How big is it? All of these things were things that like we had no idea that we should have been thinking about when we submitted the grant, but we learned after we got the funding, and we're sort of like, we've committed ourselves to see this through. And then we said, well, if it's a play space and it's accessible, shouldn't we talk to disabled people, children? Shouldn't we have conversations with maybe the school that's there and special educators and the principal of the school? Shouldn't we have conversations with like the people who are already stewarding the garden that's already there in this lot that we want to like build out even more? And so as we started to have these conversations, we began to sort of work through the challenges and the frustrations that I don't think any of us could have like pre-planned. We didn't even know what we didn't know to start engaging in this, but it really became clear that the timeline that we set out at the beginning, so like, I think the original timeline to complete this project and have it built was like by April of this year. This was in 2020, like the summer of 2020. By the time we got to September and we got like, so you submit the grant maybe in June, you get funded or you get the announcement that you're going to receive the funding in August. Well, you already wrote the grant to start the work in September. So by the time you get the announcement that you got the grant, you're already like behind schedule, if you will. And it became very clear early on that there's absolutely no way that we're going to go through this process in an equitable or any like vestige of equity and have it completed by April of this year. So I share all of this to say like these conversations with like grassroots groups and engagement, there's a level of like knowledge that oftentimes you don't even know that you don't know until you're within the thick of a project like this. And then it becomes like, well, how do we take a step back? Like we've told Kaboom in the grant proposal that we were gonna have this completed by April of next year. We can already tell like 6 months before that there's no way that that's going to happen if we're going to try to be a good steward of equitable conversation. So what I mean by that is that how can we create this accessible play space without having first had dialogues and conversations with as many people who will be the users of this project as possible? Of course, I can say like, well, I'm a disabled person. I can give a perspective, but I certainly can't represent every disabled perspective. I can't represent the perspective of disabled children, and I can't represent the perspective of parents who are raising disabled children because I don't have children. So shouldn't we first start to have conversations with all of these people? And of course you say, yes, we should do that. But those conversations and building relationships, all of them take time. Scheduling a meeting, having the conversation, taking notes, getting feedback. And so that relationship building part is so crucial to the success of a project like this, because if there is no community buy-in at like the planning part of the project, it's less likely that the project will be sustained after you've built the thing that you're going to build. So sometimes you'll hear rhetoric, well, this grassroots group came in, they built a garden, and then they left, and nobody is maintaining the garden or maintaining the play space. Why do they do that? That's like disorganized. Well, probably they didn't set out to do that. There are these like systemic issues in the process that make it more likely for something like this to like either not fully be finished, or you finish it, but then all of the promotion and goodwill sort of dies out after like maybe a year, because the process itself, the systems, the structures, they sort of feed into inequality and inequity in a way that maybe is not explicit or intentional, but is sort of baked into the process. And so one of the things that we've really been wanting to do with this project is to slow this process down and to say like, hey, why do we have to have this designed and built in 6 months? Why can't it take a year? Or maybe it should take a year and a half. Like, why does it have to be this rushed process? Especially when we all are in control of the timeline. But I think what happens is that you get in the thick of a project like this and you just want to meet the next deadline, and before you know it, you're overwhelmed, you're burned out, you're frustrated, you have no funding, and you're sort of like stuck with finishing it out. And so you just do the best that you can do, which is great, but may not be as equitable and accessible as we wanted. So what we really tried to do in like sharing all of this with you is sort of uncovering the behind the scenes and really thinking about how can we push back against this system that's created some narratives? How can we be a model and say, let's slow this work down, let's have some more intentional intentional communications and conversations, and really, instead of 540 being like the center of it, how can we make the Southwest Rotary Club, how can we make the school that's in the neighborhood, the people who are living in the neighborhood, who have already supported the garden that's already there, how can they be more central players in this design process? And how can 540 continue to sort of like uplift those voices in iZone and support as opposed to being like the center of the conversation? So those are some of the bigger takeaways that I've taken from this process, and I want to turn it to Susan to add to some of that.
Yeah, thank you, Kelvin. I think that was like a wonderful overview of the project and of some of the, things that we've had to learn about. And it's all really been a learning process because when we started this project, we were a group of obviously very intelligent, amazing individuals who have a lot of experiences. But like Kelvin said, we didn't know about zoning processes in the city. We didn't know about permitting processes. And to talk to the point about really slowing things down and being equitable about the way that we interact with our community partners, I just want to acknowledge we use the word co-creation to mean that we are everyone's a player in the game, right? So all of our community partners have been so integral to this process, and we wouldn't have been able to accomplish any of what we have without our community partners. So while 540 West Maine and iZone are stewarding the grant, we initially applied for the Kaboom grant together. Again, the Southwest Rotary Club, School 29, the 19th Ward Community Association, and a lot of other amazing community organizations and members have been so integral to this process. And just in stewarding those relationships and building those relationships, it's also really important to acknowledge when you are actually being a community engaged, having a community engaged process. And again, those relationships take a lot of time to build. It's not like you can just say, hey, we need this, or this is what has to be done next. It's definitely a process of what do you need, what does the community need, and how do we account for all of the stakeholders that are part of this project. And I can talk a little bit about play and how important play is as well, just because that's kind of a central component of this whole conversation. And play, when we talk about play, it's really easy for adults to just kind of you're just playing, you're just going on a playground, you're maybe sliding down a slide, or whatever play means to you at this point of your life. But we don't really think of it in a way of developing understanding of how to interact with your peers. We don't necessarily think of it as a really integral part of human development, childhood development. And I'm a brain and cognitive sciences major, so this is one area that I was really interested in with this. But when you play, you make connections with your peers. You learn how to problem solve. You learn resiliency. You learn how to get through certain situations. You become more physically strong. You become more mentally and cognitively strong. And I think that this just really should be central to this conversation as well. So with all of that in mind, I guess that's just it. So I will explain the project process so far, and just how we want to again center accessibility so that we can have everyone be able to play. Play shouldn't be limited to mobility or ability, and it's really important again in our process that we're really seeing and hearing the perspectives and people who have different perspectives are all pitching in to be a part of this process. And again, I'll go back to co-creation. This is a project that's being co-created by the community. So a lot of what we have in this stage of the process that we're in currently is community engagement events where we're really looking to seek feedback, seek ideas, and have people really be a part of the process of creating together. So it's not just Calvin and I are up here, but it's not just us. It's not just iZone and 540 West Maine. Again, it's all of our partners, all of the community partners that are helping, all of the community members, every kid that put their idea on a sticky note. That was part of our process of community engagement. So I just want to kind of make that clear, and it's just been a really incredible process as well. I know from a personal note, it's just been a really, really cool process. of meeting so many incredible people, and people that can really kind of put our minds together to come up with something that will benefit everyone involved. And I think, from the start, we didn't necessarily know, where we would build a play space like this, who would be involved, and what resources we would need, just as Calvin was saying. So at the start of this whole process, I think Calvin also mentioned that there have been a lot of other Kaboom grant winners in the city of Rochester. We've spoken to a lot of them. We had outreach with a lot of people, and it was really helpful to hear that because we also figured out that some people had already had the space when they applied with the Kaboom grant they knew exactly which space that they were using. They knew exactly what they, who they wanted to involve in the process. But whereas with us, we didn't necessarily have, we didn't necessarily know the space that we would be working in. And so right at the beginning of this project, we really kicked it off by just kind of like looking at which lots were city-owned and who in the community would be interested in working on a project like this. And that was a really important consideration for us because, again, we're not like the leaders of this project, we're merely like facilitators to have everyone to come together and work on this together. So when we started this project, we were basically had like a GIS map pulled up of city-owned lots in Rochester, and we did site visits. We walked around the neighborhoods to just get a feel for which community organizations, which schools were around these lots who might be using the space if we were to like set up a big space there. And so that was kind of our first phase of the project, is just really trying to figure out like where we could build a space like this and who would want to be involved. And that's when we looked at, I think one of our team members actually like went into School 29, like, hey, do you guys, what do you want, like a play space in this area? And that's kind of how we built these relationships. It was very organically, just like asking who we could have help on this project, who would want to have a play space near them. And I think that like that organicness has really like held throughout this entire process of just like, yeah, let's have a meeting, we'll set it up, and we'll just see where the conversation goes. And that's been super integral to this whole process. A lot of our outreach over the summer was just meeting with people who were extremely knowledgeable in areas that we weren't. And that leadership, like co-leadership of the entire, all of our partners and all of the people that have been creating this space with us has been just super integral to this whole process. I also want to talk a little bit about like play space versus playground. I'm going to kind of define some of the terms that we're using here while I talk about it, because I know some of them are kind of particular. You maybe haven't heard of a play space, maybe you've heard of a playground. But I think it kind of ties really into the idea of what a play space is like versus like a playground. When you think of playground, you think of a very like industrial, like it has slides, it has monkey bars, it has like, play equipment. But when we talk about play space, we do mean like a space that creates play, gets people to play. And that can look really different for people of different abilities, different mobilities. And so I think like kind of differentiating those terms a little bit is really important. And we've actually realized that through the community engagement sessions that we've had, where we ask people like, how do you like to play? And people will just say, I like to go on a slide, which is so like fair, like slides are fun, I agree. But I still do that sometimes, yeah. But I think just making sure to understand how different people play differently. And it's been quite a fun question to ask people how do you play? Like tell me about like a game you invented when you were little. When I was really lucky to have a lot of green space where I grew up, and I would play in the woods. So that just right there, just having access to a space that was very natural was something I'm like incredibly privileged to have had when I grew up. But making sure that we are asking questions during our engagements of like what could you play with? Like what would you like to hear when you play? What would you like to see when you play? What would you like to touch when you play? all of these types of questions have really led us to a different type of play space that you don't normally think about. So we have thought about the space and talked to a lot of the stakeholders in this whole project about like how can everyone use a space, and one mechanism that we discovered along our process is like a sensory garden. I know I definitely hadn't heard of a sensory garden when I started this whole process. There is a picture of a sensory garden example on this little poster here. So this is a sensory garden. But essentially what a sensory garden is that there are a lot of colors, textures, sounds, really like enticing the senses essentially. And this was something that kind of came up along our process, like I said, where someone said, well, I wouldn't necessarily want a slide. I would want like something that I could feel and touch and like, play with in that sense. So we really had to expand. Again, this whole process was like, so based on learning and openness to different ideas, we really had to expand the word play in our minds, at least in my mind. And I think that's what this whole process is about. It's just like expansion, like keeping our minds open and really hearing out like ideas from various co-creators in this process. So we've headed in the direction of having at least some sensory design features in the space that would really help integrate play for all, and making sure that like a sensory space would be inclusive of everyone of various abilities and mobilities. And I think that's just kind of one thing, like that's just one part of this whole process that came out from speaking to all of our co-creators. I think like, oh, we have to expand our idea of like what a space is. So I think, Calvin, if you want to.
Yeah, I think that just reiterating, I was thinking about the sort of what is play, what does that mean, and how it looks different. And I think that just the biggest takeaway that we've learned over the last year in this process for this project, which hopefully will be like, we'll see something tangible by 2022 summer, was really, we recently had a conversation to reassess as our role has evolved in this as well with iZone, thinking about how iZone can continue to be really the aggregator of all these ideas and connections and like stewarding the execution of this. But it's really, really important to us that the Southwest Rotary Club and the 19th Neighborhood Association and the neighbors are really at the center moving forward of these conversations. 540's role to be an amplifier, to be thinking about like how we can help promote the project, how we can help bring attention to funding the project, because that's a continuous challenge for this project, but just making sure that the people who are going to be next to, at the center of this space, are the ones who are really driving the final design and all of these conversations, which is so important. I think that a big piece of thinking about a community engagement is being adaptable and flexible, but also having like lots of humility. Like mistakes will be made, but it's almost, for me, thinking about like, what do you do when someone calls you out on something? Like, hey, well, Southwest Rotary Club already has a garden here. How are you now doing this, whatever it is, when we already have something here? Was something that was brought to my attention, and it was just like, we need to take a step back and have this conversation. And so I think that humility to say like, hey, we messed up here. How do we take accountability for that? How do we have a conversation and how do we move forward is so important. And also thinking about like, this relationship building process is so important, especially for students who are here engaging with the Rochester community. Our systems, from my perspective, we don't promote enough and prop up enough how important the relationship is, especially in Black and brown communities. So much of our language and like how grants are written, we need to see outcomes. What are the metrics? What are the data? What are you going to do? How do we know that what you're saying you're going to do is going to have an impact? But what is the impact of relationship building and making sure that people know each other? Who am I who is Susan? Like, what is she doing in my neighborhood next to my home? What is whoever doing? Why is there a mass group of 19 students coming from U of R cleaning up my neighborhood on a Friday? Like, was that relationship established? Does the community know to expect this? And I think that we take that for granted because we're so like outcome and data driven, like what is the what you're gonna do? But sometimes it's really difficult to like say, what is the value in having 6 months of conversation with people, of different users, of different perspectives? It's almost like our system doesn't reinforce through funding, like that part of the process. And to me, that's almost the most important part of the process. Because if people don't know or don't have buy-in as to what the what is, then they're not going to be a part of sustaining it. And it's just another thing in the community that some group came in and did to get their aid, to get their like degree, to do their anthropological research, their ethnography, but then they left. Like students, it's important that we have students connecting with groups like Southwest and the Neighborhood Association and School 29, but students are transient. Like usually, like Susan won't probably be here, maybe will, hope that you will, 2 years from now, right? But that thing that was done 3 years ago will, you hope, still be here and still valued just as much as when iZone was like part of the project. And to be very honest, there have been instances in which this engagement has not gone well with the University of Rochester. And so there's sometimes apprehension. And like, well, a group came in and said they were gonna do X, Y, Z 4 years ago, and they never did it. Or they did it and then they didn't give us money to keep it up, so we couldn't sustain it. Or like, who's going to be the person taking care of this garden and like cleaning it and like all the things that come after you build the thing? If those conversations aren't talked about and facilitated in that relationship building phase, it's harder to make sure that the what is sustained long term. And I see Eleanor have a question or comment, so this is the perfect segue to just like open it up to the floor.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Really loud. Two things. One is thank you for coming, Kayla's mom and grandparents. We already have started your sensory project, knowing that the focus is going to be on sensory. I work with Youth Build. We had students come out and help with the path to make it go through the garden. We've added tomatoes and raspberries, because I like them. And we push them through the fence so that people can have them. There's a little free library there and a bench, so it's a great place actually to go sit and have lunch. And the most recent, first of all, Grandpa Sam has been coming out there regularly and helping with, just maintain the garden. But it's already taking on some sensory, like we've got a good start there. He just built some bird houses because when your students were out there, I remember hearing them say that bird houses would be nice alongside. Anyway, we now have 2 bird houses. And so it's evolving, and we're really excited to see how this is going to evolve more. And again, we do ask, like there's a neighbor across the street, and I said, so like, we got strawberries, we got raspberries, when you get some strawberries, let me know. So we planted some strawberries. Next year, there's going to be strawberries. So any way that we can keep engaging people, we're going to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Eleanor. This is like perfect, so just like opening up the floor to like comments or questions. Thank you, Ray.
Hi, I was just wondering, I'm a U of R student, I was just wondering like if you're, like how to get involved if you wanted to, are there ways?
Yeah.
So we have a newsletter now, which is like a new thing for everyone. It's exciting. You can grab one of those flyers excited about, and we can definitely keep you looped in. So also, if you scan this QR code, they're placed around. I mean, I can hand you this right now if you want. So we have, that's to sign up for our newsletter. So there's and we do have like an Instagram and a website going on as well. Those are on the flyer. But if you scan that, you can kind of indicate if you want to be involved with the project further along. So we're really excited. And that goes for everyone here, not just you, our students. But if you want to be, continuously involved in this project, we're going to be really excited to have you on in some capacity, whether that's by helping out with volunteering or helping out maybe eventually when we build the space or build features of the space. It's really exciting that people want to be involved. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I just want to ask, is the play space, does it have a target age group in mind? And if so, how are the parents of these children integrated into the project?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Thank you for asking. So School 29 is right diagonal to the 133 Kenwood lot. And we have had multiple engagements with School 29 so far. We hope to continue those engagements throughout this entire process. And those students are elementary to middle school. So that is right now the target age of some of the design features that we're thinking about. And it's definitely a group that we've been engaging with and thinking about. Involving parents is definitely important to us as well, and we've been able to make some contact with parents, but we are definitely looking for opportunities to speak with more parents because that's a really important stakeholder in this whole process. They should absolutely be involved with the co-creation process, and we're always kind of looking for more ways to get involved with parents. We've definitely been thinking about that for our engagements along the road. And in general, I think given that it's a space in, very central to a neighborhood, we definitely don't want to just target one age group, although of course that's going to be a consideration when we're doing the engagements. But we also do want it to be like a community space for all. So one of the features that we've talked to people about is having like a presentation area where maybe a parent can go with their child or a group of children, or really whoever would want to use it, and just maybe giving a lesson or acting out like as if you're on a stage. So we do want to make sure that parents are included and just community members in general are included and can engage in this way. We do want it to be like a community space for all. That's a really good question. Thank you so much for asking.
Yeah, it's right behind you, right?
Hello, Zoe from iZone. Thank you both so much for all the information that you've shared with us. I'm wondering if both of you could share a story of a stakeholder that you engaged with. What made it memorable? What did you learn from it? So a story that, a story with a stakeholder that you engaged with. Thank you.
Do you want to start?
Sure. Well, for 540, we really focused a lot on improving accessibility for people who are deaf and or hard of hearing. So I think for me personally, even though I haven't been like the lead project manager on our team for this, I was able to be a part of a conversation with a couple deaf people, professionals, who were able to provide some feedback around just I think from the perspective that we got with that is that so many things like this in our community, deaf people just don't know about, just from an engagement perspective. So we're really trying to think about how we can, from a marketing and promotion standpoint, build more cohesive relationships with people in the deaf community. We know that Rochester has a very large deaf population, but because of just accessibility in general, this event, they don't know about the space in the event. So that was a big piece of it. And then I think the other engagement from a disability perspective is that we met with Stephanie Woodward, I think her name is. So Stephanie Woodward is, she created a nonprofit, I think, called Disability Her, and so empower her. And Stephanie is a wheelchair user, and so she was really some great feedback, and she's also a disability accessibility consultant for our organization. So her feedback and testimony was really powerful as well, especially around the conversations of making sure that people are like at the decision-making and planning table, not just part of the conversation like after you've figured out what you want to do and then you bring people in, but really from the beginning stages of it, making sure that as many people who are disabled across different modalities are at that decision-making table, and also like the final decision makers, because so often, you know, people, the harm that's done in these processes where there's this like touting engagement, but people, they come to an advisory council, or they come to a board, or they come to a conversation, and it's a very extractive process, so less of like co-creation and more we just want to get information from you and like do what we're gonna do anyway. So like even thinking about from that perspective, how can we work on from our funding perspective when we're having these engagements with students, with people, we wanna pay them for their 1 hour of time. So even from that level, like let's not just plan a 1 hour conversation to consult with you, but let's pay you for that time. And also this idea that came from Stephanie, that why are we paying students as well, or like giving them a gift card? Because oftentimes when children are like the end users of a project, there's also this like idea that adults are extracting from youth and not thinking about pay equity. So there are so many different facets of like equity conversations that are important, and pay equity is such a big one. Like, when we ask people for their time and energy, are we paying them for that time and energy, and are we building that payment into the budget for it? Usually it's not. So the way that the systems are now, they're not built into that, so that like community charrette, people typically are not paid for that. How can, so what I'm really interested in is how 540 can be a disruptor locally, so that when we're involved in a project like this, we are asking, do you have payment for the community members to come to that meeting for an hour and get information from them? And if you don't, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this conversation with Stephanie in particular really made us realize like how much time it takes to plan an engagement that is accessible for everyone in and of itself, right? So we can think about making the play space accessible, and we can think about taking you know, people's needs into consideration and have people really drive this process. But if someone who's in a wheelchair can't get to the event or the engagement session, then how are we being equitable? So with that in mind, again, in terms of adjusting like our timeline, we really had to start thinking about, okay, so if we plan an engagement that's really meant to, you know, I mean, all engagements should be meant to incorporate everyone who's a part of this process, but we need to start planning that, you know, weeks ahead. We need to make sure that people have transportation. We need to make sure that people can have access to the space.
Childcare.
And childcare, right? Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, taking these into consideration when we're actually doing the engagements themselves is super, super important. And to speak more on that, I think one, you know, person that I gained a lot of insight from was when we did a visit to School 29, and that day we actually went to the lot. So students came out and joined us on the lot. It was a sunny day, really, really bright outside. One thing that we just got insight from, just in that engagement in and of itself, it didn't have to do with what anyone said, but you can really get a lot of insight from just how people interact and like, you know, feel about a space. So we realized that it was really sunny and that there was no shade. So that in and of itself is just an insight that we took from that engagement, even though it wasn't necessarily like identified by people until later when we were all sweating and someone from the community came in and gave us water. It was awesome. And that just goes to show like how great this neighborhood is. Everyone's like there to help. It was a really cool event. But yeah, I think finding insights like those at these engagement sessions. There was also a student in a wheelchair who couldn't access the space as it is now because there are some fences up and then there was grass. So just from that, we recognize that we need to have pathways throughout the space that are wheelchair accessible. And another conversation that stuck out to me from one of our engagement sessions was just the other day at the West Side Farmers Market. We spoke to some parents with a girl who was maybe 3 years old, and she mentioned, well, the father mentioned that there is a park that they usually go to, but they can't really play very much there because they call it the broken glass park because there's a lot of glass in that lot. So that in and of itself is just like an insight of like what people experience on a day-to-day basis and what people experience when there isn't a space that's environmentally friendly in terms of like what's actually there, and just really goes to show how it's needed to have a really safe environment that's maintained by our various partners. And that insight really stood out to me. Like the kid, like she was very cute. She was like, the dad was like, oh, what do you do when you go to the broken glass park? She was like, oh, don't pick up the glass, like, ouchie, like, right? So, having interactions like that, it's just a like wake up call to like how people are living and the type of access that we think about when we think about Kaboom and when we think about equitable play.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I mean, that's like you just won't necessarily like I probably wouldn't be thinking from that perspective, but you have a parent who has a 3-year-old. That's really important, like the safety of the space and like the maintenance of it, like making sure that like broken glass, like or having like receptacles for trash and like recycling and all of those types of things. So I think that it's so important, like just when we have these sessions, hearing from the different users, and like there's always a perspective that, oh yeah, like we need to make sure that we have that, and like who's not part of the conversation, and how can we build a relationship with whoever isn't whose voice we haven't heard. I think that the most difficult part of all of this is like knowing. It's almost like you can have engagement forever. Like you could go on, just keep going on with getting feedback. So it's like that fine line of like how much is enough for us to move forward, but also like recognizing that this process is not like, it doesn't have an end point. So like as this space is built out, there's always opportunities and ways to make it better and improve it, to make it more accessible. And like how do we all stay stewards of making sure that there's a fund financially for that? Because again, the sustainability, the funding of that is so important, and that's often where it's most lacking in our community, where we don't have the maintenance funding to ensure that there's a person whoever's going to help clean the space is paid, and like there's people to help clean the space and maintain it and take care of it and fix things when they break down and that type of perspective. So it's really important in this work that we are thinking about the in the weeds, but also like the big picture pieces of it from the different stakeholders who will be using the space. Any other questions or comments? Thoughts?
No one else? Well, on that note, thank you so much, Bobby and Susan, for tonight's conversation. Thank you, and I round of applause. Also, once again, thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to Red Tea House for opening tonight's special for our event. Thank you to all of you for attending tonight. And really hope that your involvement continues beyond tonight. Just as a reminder, if you want to get credits for the Medallion workshop, please make sure to check in with Glenn in the back. And while I have your attention, I also want to quickly promote next semester's event. Location and date to be determined. The first one will be about counteracting gentrification in Rochester with City Roots Community Land Trust. And the second is called Opening Doors and Building Community, focused on the new Innermost North Infill project in Rochester. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and yeah, have a good night.